In this tutorial series, we'll be going through MetaSounds node by node for the Unreal Engine, learning how to go from beginner to complicated in game-driven sounds and procedurally generated music.
So now we're going to generate notes using a chromatic scale, which I've selected here, to the MIDI note quantizer, with the root note being 0, and the note N starting from this trigger counter. So this, as we've covered, it'll start at 60. It will go up by a step size of 1 every single time it counts, and it will reset after 10 counts. So it will go from 60 to 70. So we plug in the root note here. We now have, we will go up through a MIDI note scale. So we talked about MIDI notes are just arbitrary values set to like essentially a piano, and the actual frequency is mapped to that. So we can just get the MIDI note to frequency very easily with this MIDI note to frequency float, which we've already covered, and we're going to plug that in. So now we can change the MIDI note value, and it will go up chromatically, just like I showed before, but we'll be actually pulling it from a scale rather than just knowing that it's chromatic. So that plays through the chromatic scale, which is essentially playing through this array. I'll put it here. So you can see we can start doing a lot of cool things. For the root note, don't worry about that. As it says, MIDI note to treat as the root, whereas 0, 0 equals C, and 1 equals D flat or C sharp, etc. Values are clamped to positive values. You won't need to touch that until you need to deal with changing the root note. And the scale in range, as it says, is the number of semitones in the scale. As in a regular diatonic scale will have 12 semitones. Exotic scales could be something else. That's something you would change as you need to if you're dealing with exotic scales, but this is set up for the most part to deal with the kinds of scales you'll be used to using, which will be chromatic, major, and minor, and diminished. So if we go to a major scale here, you'll see that it won't necessarily change notes every time. Because if we go to a C scale, if we go right here, I can tell you that a C scale is just all the white notes between C to C. But if we go up 8 times, C61 is going to be this black note here. It's not in the scale of C. So that means that it will have to pick something that is in the scale of C. It will either pick C or it'll pick the one above it. And as you go through, it's not necessarily going to change notes every single time because as you're picking a value, it will have to filter to a value that's actually included in the major scale. Since we're starting at 60, it will be in the key of C. You can see it picks different notes to go to until it gets here to, if we got to right here at 64, 65, when it gets to those, it does a direct jump because those are already within the scale C, so it doesn't have to sort those to anything because as it says, quantizes a MIDI note to the nearest note that matches the provided criteria. We can do chord tones only. And that will make sure that you only get things that fit inside of a chord, as it says, scaled, i.e., where the major scale, maybe 1, 3, 5, and 7. Let's do something like, let's count to 16. That's a more music-friendly number. So again, that will essentially make sure that you have notes that are in a chord, so like that have a certain intervals in between them that are commonly used in chords, like the 7th, the 5th, the 3rd. This is starting to get very music theory, a little less meta sounds. So from here on, the tutorials are going to get a little less into music, but I know a lot of you guys are music people and you want to know how to make music in MetaSounds. and you will need to know some of the basics of how to utilize these. So this should get you started in utilizing notes and scales. Let's go ahead and change it to something minor, and you'll hear a more sinister tone. Or you could do pentatonic, and this is great for utilizing these never-ending songs and things like that. The thing about a pentatonic, a lot of guitar solos will be in pentatonics, because you can't, if you do a major and minor pentatonic, a pentatonic only includes notes that sound good together in their intervals. That's a fancy way to say is you can't mess up. But this has been MIDI note scale to note array and MIDI note quantizer in MetaSounds and the Unreal Engine.
This tutorial series is brought to you by my MetaSound Starter Pack. If you're looking for more complicated examples on how to utilize procedurally generated music and game-driven sounds inside of your projects, you might want to give it a look. More details in the description below. This is Space Dodo, where we talk about games and game development.